Okay, so you're very welcome to our fourth Insight seminar. So the other three that we have ran over the last couple of weeks, which was around graduate trends, graduate programs versus graduate jobs, and then the application process, right? Okay, so last week, myself and Brendan touched on the assessment centers, right? Okay, so that's what we're going to cover today. So firstly, for anybody who doesn't know us, right? Okay, I'm Gavin Connell. I work in the Career Service. Elaine Kiley, my colleague, is part of the team, and we're just going to cover off probably 30 minutes on just talking about assessment centers, what they look like, the component parts of them, and some top tips, we'll call it, right? Okay. I think on the next slide, Elaine, can I just take control and move forward?
You can, of course.
Okay. So yeah, so let me just kind of come back on this. Sorry. So we have kind of talked about virtual fairs. We had our fair last week, right? Okay, gave you an opportunity to meet. I think there was 143 exhibitors, right? Okay, so give you an opportunity to get out and see what opportunities are there, programs versus jobs, maybe opportunities that you hadn't thought about previously, and that's just an opportunity to kind of to chat about it. So it kind of in the virtual recruitment world, right? Okay, it goes into that kind of chatbot live chats at the application stage. A lot of the large recruiters we talked about last week have ATS systems, which is the automatic or automated tracking systems, which more or less tracks you from the moment you register with them, your application form, everything from phone interviews, video interviews, telephone assessment centers, referees, etc., etc. It just brings you through, and it's just an easy way for them to track how a candidate is doing. So probably space that we want to really focus on today is around the digital assessment center. So up until 2020, right, okay, all assessment centers really happened face to face, and then that transition to virtual digital happened during COVID. And personally, I don't really see it going back to face for many reasons, right? One is just the general logistics of it, right? So a lot of times you are bringing people from all over the country or global, right, okay, to an assessment center. That could be a hotel or their own business premises. They have to bring all of their teams there. They have to bring you there. And then there's a big scheduling thing in relation to how they assess you, all that kind of stuff, right? Okay, so I just logistically, it's a resource heavy thing. So I think a lot of them are going to stay online. And in that case, it's a different experience. I'm right, Elaine. It's a different experience, but it's the same competencies that they're looking for, that they're trying to address, but they're just viewing it in a different way, right? Okay, and digital has become essentially key to how they're actually doing all that assessment from that perspective. Okay.
Yeah, I think even that different experience bit, I think, and I think you're right. I think, like, kind of from a cost perspective and a logistics perspective, employers are going to continue with the virtual or the digital assessment center, and there are elements that, I suppose, things that we might do naturally, in terms of when you meet someone, saying hi to them, introducing yourself, that you might forget in a digital environment. So there are elements that you need to kind of nearly retrain yourself and teach yourself to do when you go into like a virtual assessment center, plus all of the preparation that you do if it were a face-to-face. But a lot of it is, I think, I think a lot of it is, a lot of those are behaviors that we're kind of becoming used to now, working in a more digital environment. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. So just cover off the essentials for today. Okay, the what and why of assessment centers. So if anybody is still at the space gone, why am I at this seminar? I don't even know what an assessment center is. We're going to explain what that is, right? Okay, give you a bit more context. Face-to-face versus digital things just to be, to be mindful of. Then we're going to just kind of break down the types of activities that you might be asked to do. There are samples of all of the different types of activities that you can do. Right? Okay, if it's psychometrics, that's one. E-tray, exercises, being able to do a video interview, being in group exercise, all that kind of stuff. There are loads of opportunities online to actually practice these before you actually step into that world of a 3-hour or a full day assessment centers. And then how the candidates are assessed, we'll chat about that then as well. Okay.
Yeah. And actually, on some of those resources, I'm going to just, even while you're chatting, Gavin, I'll put in some resources here to our website. And there are links then within our website to resources that Gavin's talking about.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, Elaine. Okay. So the what of assessment centers. Okay, so what is it? Okay, it is a combination of tasks and activities which assess your suitability for a job. Okay, they normally take place over a course of a day, but can be longer, shorter. Okay, I think the fact that they're actually in the digital space, I think they have become shorter because they're just much easier to manage from an employer's perspective, right? Okay, so what used to happen, as I said earlier on, right? Okay, take place in an employer's premises or a hotel or a venue, whatever the case is, depending how big the cohort there is to trying to recruit. But as we said, they've now just gone online, right? Okay, there's lots of companies out there who actually deliver kind of assessment centers as a kind of a platform. So the employer just buys a license and then it just all merges together, right? Okay, or equally, they could just bring you on to a Microsoft Teams live event or Skype, whatever, to put you into breakout rooms and they're observing your behavior doing an activity, whatever. And we'll talk about that in a few seconds. Okay. So let me just move on here. Okay, so the why. So why are they doing this, right? Okay, so one is kind of reliability, right? Okay, so I think I might have mentioned this in the last session. Maybe Brendan did, right? Okay, so interviews, right? Okay, even though they are probably the largest amount of activities that happen as part of the graduate recruitment cycle, right? Okay, so generally an interview, but it's the most unreliable way of actually recruiting somebody. Okay, because if you're just using one activity like an interview, and if it is a competency based interview, which we discussed previously, right? Okay, and there's other workshops to talk about different interview styles, that a competency based interview is your behavior in the past is a good predictor, or it's the best predictor of you in the future. But if you're really good at interviewing and you're really comfortable around given scenarios of you in the past, yeah, okay, not saying that you could make it up and push through, but you could do a very good job of convincing somebody that you're a good match for them, right? Okay, so in that case, it is somewhat unreliable. So what employers have decided to do is actually, let's just see if I put you through a range of different exercises that I can match a different competency off, right? Okay, and see how would you behave and would it match the type of competency or level of competency that we would expect for an individual starting with us. And that could be everything from teamwork, but also could be my mind's giving a blank here, Elaine. It could be
Persuasion,
persuasion, negotiation. It could be kind of
non-verbal communication.
non-verbal presentation, etc., etc. So they could have a range of different things that they're looking for that kind of new start or first entry into their organization. So it does allow companies to differentiate between candidates who seem very similar on paper. So you bring people in that might be from the same background for the same role in some cases, and they're kind of matching to see, well, how did that person behave in that circumstance and that situation over somebody else, right? Gives you a really good insight, right? Okay, from kind of both, right? Okay, so you want somebody who is not just following, we'll call it a herd of people who are just applying for grad programs, right? Okay, my friend is applying, so I need to apply. And next thing they arrive at an interview, and one is they may not even know what the organization really does. Second one is that they possibly don't know if they're a good fit for the organization. And really what the insight here is gives both an insight into, is this a good fit for me as an individual, but also from an employer's perspective, they're saying, is that a good thing as well? It is generally considered to be very fair. Okay, it gives the opportunity to present their skills, candidates that is, their experiences and aptitudes across a variety of activities. The one thing I would say to you on this, right? Okay, if you have done anything around your personality preferences, as of yet, if not, Lane has put some resources online. You can go online and just have a look at your preferences, right? So in this space, there's obviously those who are extroverts and introverts, right? Okay, and this doesn't necessarily play against an introvert, but you just need to be very aware of sitting back and being kind of overly quiet on the kind of thing of that I will say something in maybe 15 minutes or whatever when I've kind of got a sense of how things go, because the activity might be over in 20. So you may not have had the opportunity to give your kind of maybe present yourself in the best of what you could offer to that organization. So you just really need to be aware of that. You need to be on game or on kind of just on, we'll call it, right? Okay, for the whole all of these activities, as opposed to kind of like my preference might be that I'm kind of thinking about it and then I'm going to jump into it in a few minutes, right? Okay, so just be conscious of that. So the cost, although it can be high, assessment centers mitigate recruitment errors, which means an intrinsic cost reduction down the road, right? Okay, so I think we talked about this before, that the most costly expense in a recruitment cycle is hiring the wrong person, because it takes you 6 months to 9 months to actually discover that, and then you have to figure out how you're either going to get them to become a better employee, or maybe they have to leave the organization. So from a cost perspective, that's one of the whys that they do that. Okay. So just be kind of aware on the assessment centers themselves. It's generally the final round for graduates. Okay, there might be an interview as part of that, right? Okay, they might just include that as part of it, but generally it's the final round, right? You are competing against yourself on this one, because even though I just said in the previous slide that they look to do that benchmarking across different individuals, but they may not be there on that day. Right, okay, they might be there in the afternoon session. It could be that they've just decided that, you know what, the cohort that turned up in the first assessment center are all ideal. We could just recruit directly out of that first cohort and may take nobody out of the next day. Right, okay, so
Yeah.
online.
And I was just going to say, I think that's a great thing to know and to kind of think when you're going into an assessment center, because sometimes when you go into an environment like that, you think you're competing with the people that you're going in with. But when you consider that like kind of 80% of candidates or more can be taken from like kind of one assessment center, um, really what you need to think about is like kind of the people that you are going into the experience with are your colleagues, your teammates.
Yeah.
You're working with them, so that can be like kind of a good frame to use when you're going into an assessment center. It's not that you're trying to be better than or compete against the people that you're in with. You're trying to work with them, because remember, the whole idea of an assessment center is to give you a type of an experience that will often mirror what it would be like to work in an organization. And in every organization that you work in, you're going to have to work with other people, and so it's giving you the opportunity to practice and to see what it would be like to work with other people.
Yeah. So consider them your friends. So I would, because myself and Lane, we've been involved running kind of assessment centers here for some of our postgrad students, and it's amazing that you see behaviors, even though they know that it's kind of an experiential learning opportunity to kind of just develop the skills and get a sense of comfort around what happens in an assessment center, that some behaviors just jump to the fore, that they think they're competing against the other 5 people in the room, and you're actually thinking, no, this is meant to represent a team. You're meant to be collegial, right? Okay, you're meant to involve them, right? Okay, to get the best output, right? Okay, it's not that you're the leader and you have to succeed. It's not about that. It's about how you participate. And as I said earlier on, it could be persuasion, it could be negotiation, etc., etc. But you have to do that as a grouping. It's not you as an island trying to figure out it all. Right.
Yeah.
So your university group work will most certainly help, right? Okay, everything from your undergrad program that you may have done, or equally into your postgrad, or any experience of group work in that sense, and that could be sporting, is always going to help in that perspective, right? It is generally high intensity, multi-activity, with several assessors scoring you all the way along. Okay, so Brendan, some of you might know he was on the sessions last week. He always tells a very interesting story about a recruiter friend of his that he knew, and the recruiter friend would always ask the receptionist about the individuals that came in for interview or for the assessment centers, how they behaved. So they're looking from the very moment you walk in, how do they interact with the receptionist, the security guard, whatever the case is. So they're just looking for behaviors. Are they consistent? So are you behaving in a certain way in this controlled environment, like an interview or assessment center, or you like that the whole way through? So they're just kind of watching. So always be aware that at all times, even if they're kind of breakout rooms, somebody might be listening, right? Okay, you might be observing how you're behaving on your kind of downtime in that digital space as well. So just be conscious of that, right? Okay. Okay. So what to expect and how to prepare, right? Okay.
Want me to
So
take this?
yeah, jump. Yeah.
Sure.
Don't take.
Yeah, I think I have it. So yeah, in terms of and to Gavin's point there, in terms of like kind of, I suppose that you are being assessed at every stage. So it's about your manners and your ability to like kind of communicate, but it is also being aware that like kind of the whole idea is to see you in your like in your real environment, because like Gavin was saying, you can go into an interview and you can have excellent experiences and competency stories prepared and come across really, really well. but that may not like kind of be the whole. And an interview isn't, an interview isn't the whole of an individual. It's like one aspect of your ability and your behaviors in terms of performance. And that's why assessment centers are used by particularly like kind of large graduate recruiters, because it's very hard for them to determine the difference between candidates, because they're very similar. Many, final year candidates or postgrad candidates have the very similar education background, very similar experiences. And so this gives them the opportunity to see you in a number of different environments. Whether it's like kind of digital or face to face, I mean, in terms of what to expect, you can get a lot of information sent to you. So you can get some preparatory information, maybe, case studies that you might have to read up, or presentation, like kind of topics that you might have to prepare. So there may be preparation in advance, but definitely in terms of like kind of the virtual environment, I should say, that there can be lots of links that you need to be able to click. It's sometimes even up to 10, on the invitation email that you're getting. So you really need to be on the ball and ready, and have all of the, Gavin was laughing at me last week when we had the careers fair, and we were each looking after like kind of a number of different companies, and I had about 30 tabs open on my screen with, a link to each of the individual companies, because I just find it very easy then to kind of control alt and be able to switch in and see, who I'm talking to at any given time. So whatever method like works for you, to make sure that you have all of those links at the ready, in terms of being able to connect with the whoever the assessors are. Generally, in terms of the numbers of candidates that will be in an activity, you're talking about 4 to 6 for an online event. If it's face to face, it could be up to 10. But for it to be, and again, like Gavin was saying there earlier, you're being assessed at all times. Oftentimes you'll have maybe 2 assessors for every candidate, and those 2 assessors are looking at your behaviors. So I think that's the thing to remember then as well with assessment centers. It's not always about your knowledge. Now, there may be aspects of it. If you're going for a finance role, you'll be expected to look at maybe a finance case study, or if you're going for a marketing role, you may be expected to pitch an idea. So there is an element of it that's like kind of based on your expertise, but a lot of the time it's based on your behavior and how you engage with others, how you present yourself, how you communicate with others, how you negotiate with others. And so in that instance, like kind of that 4 to 6 is I suppose is the magic number when you're talking about a virtual environment on screen, with the assessors may be visible to you on screen, or they may have their cameras turned off in a virtual environment and be observing you as you engage in the activity. Again, with the assessment center, we'll see this in a few minutes, there's going to be a mix of activities, and sometimes those activities will be generic for every candidate and every role. So you'll find an organization will have an assessment center to recruit graduates into different roles, into different departments, but equally then, like I was saying there a moment ago, that if it's for maybe a marketing role, the activities may be more tailored toward that. So it may be a pitch, an individual presentation, a debate. Whereas if it's a highly numerate role, it may be, looking at like kind of a financial plan, looking at financial projections. You may, in the instance like kind of a case study, if it's around finance, you may actually get new information thrown into the mix, halfway through the activity, and then you have to kind of take on board what the new scenario is and adapt and show your ability to adapt to the changed circumstances. So the activities will be a variety of them, some individual, some group activities, but they will also, bear in mind that they will be geared towards the roles that you're applying for. And then this is the key thing, I think, to remember. For every activity, you're going to be assessed against key competencies. And so what are competencies? So competencies are a combination of your skill, your attitude, and your behavior. And while there are competencies like kind of that are technical, we'll call them. So say your language competency, or your SolidWorks competency, or your IOR competency from a HR perspective. So those are the skills or the competencies that you learn as part of your program of study. But then there are these other competencies that, you know, every single one of us will have to a certain extent, and develop them like kind of over different aspects of what we're involved in, whether it's education or extracurricular. And they are things like your communication, your teamwork, your leadership, your presentation skills, your negotiation skills, your adaptability, your time management. And these are competencies that you will have developed over the course of your life to date, whether it's in school or college or work or voluntary experience or your sporting activities or your debating and drama. All of the life activities that you engage in will help you to develop those competencies. And that's what the employers are looking for in an assessment center. So they want to see, they give you an activity and they're saying, okay, I'm looking to see what this person's communication, their verbal communication is like, or I'm looking to see how this person gets on as part of a team, or I'm looking to see whether this person can persuade me to follow their idea or to follow their plan. And then that's what you're trying to show through your engagement in the activity. And so that's down to your behaviors. So very much like what Gavin was saying earlier, and this kind of ties a little bit back to personality preference. If you're a very reflective person and you sit back and you're not engaging, or you're slower to kind of participate, I can't see any behaviors. So if I'm the assessor and you're sitting there thinking, there's no way for me to assess what that, like kind of what's going on in your head in terms of that thinking. So it's only through your engagement and through your behavior that I can actually assess to see whether you're demonstrating the competencies that I'm looking for. And I think that's important. And I think, I suppose we'll have tips at the end, but probably the two biggest tips that I would have for you, if you are if you are the kind of person who prefers to kind of reflect and sit back a little bit beforehand before engaging in an activity, two things that you could do to push yourself forward and be more engaged in each of the activities is nominate yourself to be the timekeeper, because that's always something that you always have to watch. How much time do we've left? How much time has passed? And so if you take on that role, you are automatically going to have the experience of moving the activity along, or interjecting at key points, like kind of within the activity, saying, I think we need to kind of park whatever this discussion is and move on to the next part of the activity. So that's one thing. And the other thing could be note taker. So if there is a whiteboard, or if you get like kind of you know a what it is called whiteboard online as well as like kind of face to face. If you get like kind of a whiteboard that you can keep notes, then you could act as the note taker, and that's very good, because what you're doing is you're amalgamating all of the information that's being discussed as part of the activity. The only thing that I would say is be careful that you're not just the note taker. You also need to kind of put in your own input and your own ideas and additions into the activity. But it can be a very good way for those that find it much harder to jump in at the very beginning into the activity to have a very strong engagement throughout. So that's what's going to happen. You'll have a series of activities. Each activity will have a number of competencies, and then it's all about your behavior. It's all about demonstrating the behavior for you to be able to showcase that you're demonstrating that competency. Sometimes it'll happen then once you join, the virtual assessment center, that you might be put into, like Gavin was saying there, it might be just, you might be put into a virtual meeting room and like a holding room. And remember, you may still be assessed during that. So, if that happens to you, and if you're in a room with other people, make sure you introduce yourself. Say who you are, what course you're doing, what university you're from. If there are other like kind of universities that if you're participating like kind of with a number of other institutions. So definitely, like kind of when you're in that room, use that as your own icebreaker. But then you may be invited into a series of different links and rooms, and that's where it's very important to have all of those links at the ready, I would say. normally the person that's going to move you or invite you in, so they may create breakout rooms and you will be invited in. Look, technical issues happen. If you get like kind of kicked out or you don't get in, log out and log back into the main room. And normally there's someone in that main room who's there, who will be able to like kind of, re-put you into the breakout room for the activity. But again, the schedule that you'll get at the beginning will normally determine what, you'll be told what the activity is and what time each you're on. And so the big thing is, yeah, to have like kind of a not get lost. And again, most organizations will have like kind of, an email or a contact person that if worst case scenario, you are kicked out of a room and you can't get back in, that you can email them and get them to like kind of resend a link directly to that room. So not to panic, I think is the other thing, just to have like kind of, have your email open or have your email on another device at hand that you can contact someone in the event that that happens. Then, I mean, if we're thinking in terms of preparation, and this is very important. And actually, Gavin mentioned that we do the assessment center with some postgrad courses. And over the past couple of weeks, this is work that we've been doing in terms of getting tech sorted. So I've had students come online who think that they're in a really good Wi-Fi zone. And it turns out then that they like kind of the minute they turn on their camera, the system has crashed for them. So it's a very good idea not to just assume that because you're in, whether it's on campus accommodation or you're in, somewhere that has like kind of Wi-Fi and broadband, that everything like kind of is okay without testing it in advance. So, try and, oh yeah, go ahead, Gavin.
Just on that line, it's a good point. So you may be or you may not be aware. So Microsoft Teams is extraordinarily heavy on bandwidth for video. So the other ones like Zoom, that kind of stuff, are pretty okay. But on Teams, it's well known. So while you could be in an okay or Wi-Fi space, right? Okay, if you have your camera off, you can pick up everything. But it's when you turn on your camera, it just drains, and where what would have been okay normally is really poor, and it camera, the whole thing starts to die in you. So I would make sure that you're in a very good space, that that there's good broadband. Yeah.
And to that point, you will be expected to activate your camera. You can't expect to go through an assessment center or an online interview without activating your camera and being visible. So you should, have appropriate attire. You should be like kind of dressed professionally, considering that, but also like kind of from that tech perspective, make sure that you practice beforehand. So if you can have a couple of backup plans, I would say have your mobile charged. If you have like kind of a second device, like an iPad, to have that to hand, but test them out again, because like that, if you're using MS Teams, if you're using the web version of MS Teams, it doesn't facilitate you to go into breakout rooms. So you need to make sure that you download the app. So you could test like kind of, whatever the platform is on each of your devices beforehand, and practice presenting to camera, practice having a discussion with friends, on team. And that's a kind of a fairly easy thing to do. You can, without even, having a meeting with your friends, you can just set up a meet now. That's one of the options. You can go in there and record yourself, and see like kind of, how you look, how you're getting on in terms of presenting to camera. Because what you want to do is absolutely focus on that green dot. You're engaging in that. I mean, in my instance, it's actually a white dot, and some it's green, but you're engaging in that dot as if it is a person, because that's what's giving you the eye contact from the other perspective. So if I'm looking at the camera, who's ever viewing me on the other side thinks that I'm looking at them, I'm making eye contact with them. And that's that's very important, because it's very easy to kind of start, looking down or looking at like kind of the image on the bottom of the screen, and you're losing out on that like nonverbal communication if you're doing that. The other thing would be to use a professional background. So, I mean, there was a poor student last year, and we still reference her, that whatever happened, she didn't have her, even though we had sent professional backgrounds to people for our assessment center, she hadn't put it up on time, and all you could see was all her intimate laundry drying on the radiator, and she was mortified. And now, look, it happens to everyone. I mean, we weren't making judgments, but what happened was it threw her for the activities. So she felt she didn't get the benefit of the event, because she saw that that was what happened, and that was the very first impression that she created in terms of going online. So have your background professional, have your screen up before you engage. And then, as I said, finally, dress as if you are attending an interview, because it is an interview. The assessment center are a series of activities that are assessing you in terms of your suitability for a role. And I suppose the other thing, and the reason I have a smiley face in there, is I know we're making this is all very serious and formal, and it is, but one of the best assessment centers that that we will be involved in will have humor in them as well. And so that you have fun, because again, remember, the whole point of it is to try and see how you react in, I mean, I know they're not normal circumstances, but during activities that you'd be engaged in the workplace. And so, if you're working with your colleagues, you want to have a bit of fun as well. So not to be afraid to use humor, I would say, during those activities. So in terms of, I suppose, all of the types of activities, so I mentioned there, if you get invited into a room, you may, there may be a holding room, use that yourself as the opportunity for an icebreaker. Introduce yourself, ask other people their names. But the organization may have an icebreaker activity, and the whole idea behind that is for you to facilitate you to introduce yourselves to each other. So, that standard two truths and a lie, that you say two things about yourself that are true and one thing that's a lie, and the other people have to determine or guess what that is. Or it could be something as simple as giving you a word search, or what are those activities called? Not word clouds, but that like anagrams, and asking you to come up with the correct answers for words. So it could be a team-based activity, but a fun activity to just break the ice to start the event off for you. And then again, it even though they're icebreakers, remember, the competency that might be assessed here is your communication and your ability to engage and network with other people. Then you will find, generally speaking, that the formal activities that will be used in an assessment center will be the types that I've exampled here, like group discussions, case studies, a group presentation or an individual presentation, or role play scenarios. Role play scenarios are probably less inclined to be used in a virtual environment now in a group setting. So they may be more, one-on assessor. But definitely, is in a group discussion, you may be given an activity that may have very little to do with the role that you're applying for. And may seem that it's not relevant. But again, remember, the idea behind that group discussion will be to assess competencies like your teamwork, like your energy, your enthusiasm, your determination, your communication skills. And so you will be asked, individually to maybe come up with a solution to something, and then to agree on something as a group. Or you may be asked to come up with a group idea or a group presentation. Again, this is the point where, using your role as timekeeper, using your role as note taker can be very good opportunities for you to find ways to engage with the group. So there's no virtue in not saying anything at all, but equally, from an employer's perspective, it's also not about taking over. So remember, if it's a group discussion, it may not be just about trying to see who a potential leader is. It's also trying to see who are good teammates. So you're trying to balance that engaging and not taking over. So case studies, for example, like I mentioned, around, say, you might have a financial case study, or it may be a negotiation issue, or it may be a problem-based scenario that you're presented with, and you're being asked individually to come up with a solution, or to agree it as a group within your group activity. presentations. Sometimes you'll find that companies in advance will give you a topic that you'll be asked to present on, and then on other occasions you'll be given the topic there and then with some time to prepare and to deliver a presentation. So Gavin was mentioning earlier that like kind of when we work with the postgrads on the assessment centre, the presentation that we ask everyone to deliver is this teammate, tell me about yourself, because that's going to come up in every recruitment scenario you ever come across, whether it's in an interview or you know, even like kind of a pitch at a careers fair. You know, every employer is going to say, well, tell us a little bit about yourself and why are you interested in our company? And it's a very good idea to kind of practice and engage in developing your own presentation about yourself. The next three that I have on the list there, the psychometric tests, the situational judgment, and the personality questionnaires. Oftentimes, they're aspects of the assessment centre that you will be asked to do in advance. So when you apply for the role, you may be sent a link and you may have to complete the psychometric tests. So psychometric tests comprise the numerical reasoning tests, verbal reasoning tests, sometimes abstract reasoning tests, and you will get a score on that then that score will determine like kind of whether you're called to the next stage of the process. But sometimes if there is a query around your score in those, you may be asked to repeat those tests during the assessment centre. So that can happen. One of the links that I've put into the chat function here today is the link to the Team Focus portal. And that is a platform that we have bought a license to that you can use as a student free of charge, and you can go in and practice these tests. The personality questionnaire that we have as part of Team Focus is called Type Dynamics. That will tend to be used by employers as part of their team development. So that will never be used for recruitment purposes. There are personality questionnaires that will be used for selection and recruitment, but they tend to be like kind of, they're called trait and factor based questionnaires. And again, you'll often find that they'll be at the end of the recruitment process. Sometimes then you will have, and this would particularly have been the case if you had like face-to-face based recruitment experiences in assessment centres, you'd have written tests or in-tray or e-tray exercises to complete. You'll find that there's potentially less of those, and maybe they're being moved more into kind of gamification. So you're nearly given like a game to complete, and that game will be assessing your speed and accuracy, your time management skills, your ability to prioritize. But that's part of the reason that many of those tests are given to you. And then finally, I've mentioned social events. So again, you know, you won't find those as much when it comes to a virtual assessment center, but you know, you may be asked to kind of engage either virtually or face to face as we move back into opening the economy up. And even those social events, whether it's like kind of dinner or drinks or cheese and wine events, whatever those events are, you are still being assessed. So it's back to Gavin's point that from the minute you enter the premises to the security guard, to the reception desk, to the time that you leave, you know, you are being assessed like kind of on the various different criteria that the company are looking for. Gavin, did you want to add any onto those?
No, I suppose the only thing on the social events, I think they're probably going to get a bit more common, right? Okay, because you know, even though the assessment centres will be virtual, they will want to meet you face to face before they offer you employment, right? Okay, I think they will anyway, right? And I think the social events will become more commonplace, right? Okay, because they will want to see how you do interact in a more natural environment, right? Okay, there was a thing before, okay, about should I take a drink, should I not take a drink, right? Okay, that was always a big question. So there's nothing wrong with having a drink. Having too much drink is always the key problem here, right? Okay, so learn how to moderate and actually to hold a glass for a long time, right? Okay, or if you don't drink, that's perfectly fine as well. It's not, there's no reason why you should have to have one, but there's no reason why you shouldn't either, right? Okay, it's just to see how you would behave, because in a lot of the especially the law firms, right? Okay, they would be definitely not monitoring it, but they would be kind of very mindful of, well, if you were out with clients or stuff like that, well, how would you actually be an ambassador for their organization? So they're just mindful and watching out for that kind of stuff. So that's just something to be mindful as well. Okay.
And actually, that's a very good point. That is, you know, that is oftentimes like kind of from those social aspects. It is particularly if you've got like kind of client-facing roles
Yeah.
that they want to see how you are in terms of like kind of being able to engage, you know, and network with like kind of new people that you haven't met before. Absolutely. So what I've put up here is a sample, you know, of what like kind of if you were to take an activity and think about like kind of the competencies that might be assessed for it. So for example, a group discussion might be assessing your teamwork capacity and your drive and determination, or a presentation might be assessing your oral communication and your persuasiveness. So again, you know, as part of your research going into an assessment center, and once you kind of see what the activities are and you reflect on what the role is that you're applying for, have a think about what the competencies are that they could be looking for in each of the different activities. Because of course, a group discussion could equally be looking for your communication skills, you know, but equally, you know, an organization might say, well, look, that's par for the course. We're going to expect that you've got good communication. So we're not even going to assess that as a competency. Really what we're like more interested in is to see, do you get to the end of the activity? Do you like kind of, have you got the drive and determination to keep going, to face adversity if something else like kind of is thrown into the middle of the mix? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with setbacks? So I suppose the thing for you to do is reflect on these as much as you can beforehand, because the reality is once you get involved, once you get stuck in, you're not going to be sitting there thinking, I wonder what they're assessing now. You know, that goes out the window. You forget like kind of what that is. So in as much as you can, if you're thinking about that beforehand, you're going to start to, you know, absorb and like kind of nearly subconsciously then be trying to demonstrate like kind of the behaviors associated with those competencies. And so that's part of it, is your ability and your attitude through the competencies and through your behaviors. Equally, you know, in terms of candidates being assessed, it's to see whether you're the right fit for the role and for the organization. And generally, in terms of who's assessing you, it's going to be a combination of HR and line managers. That's who you'll generally find will be involved. So a sample of what a timetable might look like could be something like this. And as Gavin said, I mean, it's very much the case that, you know, you wouldn't have all day events online. You may have an all day event if it's a face-to-face assessment center, but not really if it's a virtual assessment center. But you can see there's quite a few activities going on here in the space between like kind of, you know, 9 and 2:30. You've got introductions, you know, you may have the situational judgment tests. You'll have reading time, like kind of you may be able to like kind of turn off your camera when you're doing that, or you may be, you know, it may be the norm to kind of keep it on. So think in terms of like kind of, I suppose, getting used to preparing with your camera on. Individual presentations, and then sometimes there may be, say you may have gone through a first round interview before the assessment center, and then you're invited, and then there may be a second round interview at the assessment center. So that can also happen, or it may be a group interview. So you'll find it can like kind of be a combination, group discussions, and then you'll normally have like kind of a debrief from the assessors at the end with, you know, the next steps and like kind of any Q&A that you have. So just to kind of give you, I suppose, some final tips on, you know, attending and preparing for assessment centers. I would definitely say, you know, listen carefully, because you'll be getting a lot of information at the time of the event and at the time of the activity. So just to kind of give it your full concentration, and also to take on like kind of the role of timekeeper or note taker, and what can be like kind of a very effective way of dealing with an activity is to summarize what you've heard other candidates say before adding your piece to, you know, whatever the discussion is. So it's nearly like scaffolding. You're nearly like kind of adding value as you move up like kind of and through the activity. Not to be afraid to be humorous, you know, and humor can be like kind of so good in terms of showcasing your communication and your persuasion and your networking. So it's very good, like kind of not to feel that you have to be like kind of very, very strict and formal and serious throughout the whole process. And to remember that whole notion of kind of quality and quantity. So it's not always about like kind of jumping in and being the person who's talking the most in the activity, because that's not necessarily going to showcase your good team spirit or your ability to like kind of engage others and get others to be involved in the process. So like Gavin is saying, like we have seen situations where people have literally, you know, in a physical face-to-face assessment center, taken their chairs and like turned sideways away from those that are participating. And I mean, as body language goes, you can't get any more obvious than that of someone who's not a good team player, you know, if you're going to do something like that. So you don't want to do the virtual version of that by excluding everyone else from talking in the activity. But equally, there's nothing virtuous about saying nothing. So if you are reflective, if you are kind of on the eye of the EI, like kind of spectrum within the personality preference, then think about taking the timekeeper, the note taker role. And don't be afraid to challenge. So if you disagree with something, don't be afraid to say that you do, but you want to do so calmly. You know, you don't want to get into an argy-bargy with others on the team.
Can I just add some stuff there,
Yeah,
actually, Elaine? Just
absolutely.
while Elaine just mentioned that physical movement of a body, of a person, their body language. So that person wasn't even aware that they did that, right? Okay, that was, you know, like it was just you call it, I wouldn't say instinct, because that shouldn't be instinct, but it was just an unconscious thing that person just disagreed with the person. They didn't seem to like it, and they just moved their chair, and it was like everybody who was assessing just stood back and went, wow, that was such a tell, right? Okay, in a way, right? Okay, I suppose coming back to it, sometimes uh, students, whoever who are going through this, forget to eat, right? Okay, it's really important to keep your energy, like, and that's either liquids or actually food, right? Okay, because it's a long day, right? Okay, you are constantly going, right? Okay, so to remember just to have snacks with you, whatever the case is, energy bars, whatever keeps you going, because your energy will run out because you're concentrating so much and you'll feel very drained, especially being on a digital space as well. So that part where you're given the break, take the break, step up away from the PC and go for whatever, a walk, bring some food with you, whatever, just get some fresh air, get out, right? Okay, is what I would say to you. So I suppose the other one that does come up every so often is the scheduling. Okay, so you will get an automated email from ABC company saying this is your day, whatever the case is. If for some reason you can't make that, right? Okay, generally speaking, they hold multiple of assessment centers, right? Okay, there's absolutely nothing wrong with going back and say, look, I actually have an exam on that day. Is there any way that I can, you know, if possible, can I change? If they say no, just say that's okay. Okay, that's at least you've asked, right? Okay, but generally speaking, it's only they'll say no if you leave it to the day before. Okay, so as soon as you get to comms, you check your exam diary or whatever it is that you have, right, or timetable, and make sure. Now, most times they will actually ensure that all assessment centers are done outside of the official university exam timetable, but it might be that you're in a module that you have whatever, an in-class exam or whatever like that. So it is okay to ask to change where appropriate, right? Okay, so I would say do that as soon as you can, to give them as much advance notice from that perspective. No, yep.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. And so, and I suppose our final advice is to use the career service. So, I mean, we are here to meet with you, as well as the insight seminars and other workshops and seminars that we are delivering on, you know, all topics related to career and professional development. You can meet with us on a one-to-one, attend employer events. And so the best way to connect with us is through Careers Connect. So you're all automatically registered on Careers Connect, and indeed it's through Careers Connect today that you would have attended this event. But not to forget that, like, kind of, you know, that there are all those individual as well as group supports there for you, as well as the likes of the platform like Team Focus, like Career Set to review your CV, like Shortlist Me, which is a very good one, and particularly in terms of preparation for an assessment center, because you're going to be recording yourself and being able to review yourself in terms of, are you making eye contact with the camera? Are you succinct and able to answer questions within the 2 minutes, like kind of that the time frame that you have? So yeah, to avail of all of the services that we have like kind of available. And in addition, we also have the YouTube channel where you can view past presentations that we have like kind of recorded. I know this one will be available to you on MS Teams as well after the event, having registered it. And to say thank you to you for participating and attending.